Imagine it. The year is 1877. Queen Victoria is proclaimed the Empress of India. Swan Lake premieres in Russia, and Wimbledon happens for the first time. Stateside, Crazy Horse and other Sioux warriors are defeated for the last time at Wolf Mountain. Frederick Douglass is appointed Marshal of Washington, D.C. by the President. News is passed via telephone for the first time between Boston and Salem. At 15, Chester Greenwood patents earmuffs. The first Easter egg hunt happens on the White House lawn. And speaking of new things happening in the White House, a new president is inaugurated. As previously mentioned, Rutherford B. Hayes was the victor in the most fiercely disputed election in American history. In fact, when he went to bed on election night, he wholeheartedly believed that the Democrats were going to win. Much like another president we're going to talk about in the next century, Truman, he went to bed believing that he lost the election, only to wake up the next morning and... So, what happened? Well, let's just say you don't get the name Rutherford for no reason. And to be fair, he wasn't the fraud. But people were very upset about what happened. Essentially, what you have is an election that was just all kinds of wonky as far as results are concerned. Several states just had either fraud going on and inconclusive results. It was a really weird election. But there were so many fraudulent or fake votes put in, and people, it was just, the whole video could be made. It was just such a mess. But there was a special election committee put together of members of the House of Representatives, Congress, and the Supreme Court to figure out what happened and who really won the election. The truth is, Hayes didn't technically win the popular vote or the electoral vote and still got in his presidency. And that's because after they took all the information and as best they could figured out what was going on with the fraudulent votes, they threw out enough of the Democrat votes to swing favor over to the Republicans. And that's essentially how he won. Now, he may or may not have technically won the popular vote in the U.S. election, but for the entirety of Grant's presidency, Hayes was actually governor, a very popular governor in Ohio. As a president, he is viewed as very honest, but yet he still has some conflicting views. For example, he did not agree with the Republicans that one of his cabinet members should be a Southerner. And then he goes on to give a cabinet position to an ex-Confederate. Very controversial. Another example is how he advocated for the rights of Black Americans, but at the same time, he believed in local self-governing, which, if, as you may remember from Grant's presidency, is not the most reliable thing, especially when it comes to the rights of Black Americans. To his credit, he had a belief that removing the federal troops would create a new Southern Republican Party. And it did. They agreed with him on policy, and they were very supportive of Hayes as president. It just wasn't enough to win over the rest of the Southern population. When it comes to other parts of the country, there was a problem at the Mexican-Texan border. It was lawless, and crime was happening, and there's pretty much nothing going on about it. So Hayes decided to get in touch with the president after sending out federal troops to man the border. Not a whole lot was happening with that either, but he did end up working with the Mexican president to come up with a solution. By June, Hayes had made good on his commitment to improving civil service by issuing an executive order that forbid federal employees to get involved in elections. or other political activities. 1 month later, you had the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, which was from the B&O Railroad, which is a railroad I have owned many times in Monopoly. But the infighting within the strike got so bad that Hayes had to send out federal troops to squash it. But all that anger was redirected then towards the Chinese workers on the railroad. At the start of 78, the very first labor union opens up in Philadelphia. Later in the month, the U.S. signs a treaty with Samoa, and it states that we're there to have a naval base. And also, if someone tries to start something with Samoa, we will step in. In March, Hayes vetoes a bill that was stating no vessel was allowed to carry more than 15 Chinese immigrants. So instead, he worked directly with China in order to have a say in Chinese immigration. In May of 78, Democrats are still mad about him being president. So they decide to open up another investigation about the election. And he's kind of nervous about it because he really feels like he's going to be replaced with the guy that he won over, Tilden, who was governor of New York. At this point in time, the Democrats had the lead in both the House of Representatives and Congress, and it's the first time that that's happened since the Civil War. By spring of 79, a new bill comes through that would have all federal troops removed from the polling centers in the South. This was viewed by Republicans and much of the public as a way for the Democrats to keep black men from voting. So Hayes vetoes the bill. The bill is rewritten in a way that they hope he will agree on. They put it back on his desk. It passes. And he once again vetoes the bill. This determination to keep the voting safe for the black men who are going to vote is really what gives the Republican Party an edge up in the coming up election. Now, just so you know, he doesn't lose his next election. He doesn't run. This is his only shot at getting things right. So I guess he's going for it. A year later, Hayes was so inspired by the architect of the Suez Canal in Egypt that he went out and talked how much he supported the idea of making a canal that brought together the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans under U.S. control, of course. 34 years later, we got the Panama Canal. Before leaving office, Hayes signs a new treaty with China, which gives the U.S. A say on how much immigration can happen from China, and they can even suspend it temporarily if they want to and are limited greatly, but they cannot stop it entirely. That does mean, though, they also can't bring opium to China, and now China has trading privileges. Next up, meet the president with one of the shortest presidential tenures,